The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with James McTevia, author of Financial Reality. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Glad
Jim,
to be here.
You're a turnaround consultant for corporations and individuals trying to get out of debt. And the book, Financial Reality, I think is an important one because it's easy to read, it's interesting, it's even kind of fun to read, even more fun if you're not in deep financial trouble. And the other thing that I think is important about it is that it's divided mainly into three parts: individual indebtedness, corporate indebtedness, and the federal government's indebtedness. And you obviously see a strong relationship among the three of those things.
That's right. The people in Washington and the people that run our corporations are us. And we are all a product of our society, and the people who are in Washington represent us. People who run our companies represent the employees, represents the shareholders and everything. And the book tracks my history of working with financial difficulties, crises, for the last 37 years. And in order to credentialize myself, in order to make the reader understand that I know what I'm talking about, I have to bare my soul and confess that I was there once myself.
You were very honest about admitting your mistakes. You said you were a spender as a young man. Talked about the golden goddess, the blonde goddess.
I was better than a spender. I was better than a spender. I was a squanderer. And I had absolutely, even though I earned my money very hard, I had absolutely no relationship to a value of money whatsoever.
Well, and it's interesting because you had a good model, it seems, as a child. You said that your parents said if you wanted money, you needed to earn it.
Absolutely, and I went out and earned it, and I went out and spent it. I can't for the life of me understand how I could work so hard through so much agony and get paid on Friday and on Monday be broke. Actually, sometimes on Saturday be broke.
When did you see the light?
Well, it's interesting. We got married at an early age and very quickly had 4 children. And I do not have a formal education, so I got into finance right away with a loan company and then with the bank. And back in the days when I started in banking, you were earning $50 a week. To support a wife and 4 children on $50 a week was more than a challenge.
This was in the 50s? No?
Yes, this was in the late 50s, yeah, late 50s, early 60s. By the way, those were years when the national debt was under control, totally under control, even after we had
surplus at one time.
Absolutely, even after we had financed 2 wars. World War II was completely financed, the Marshall Plan, everything, and the country was out of debt. The consumer was out of debt for the most part. Credit cards weren't heard of in those days. 20% is what you borrowed on a car, not what you put down on it. And plastic was relatively unknown to most people at that time. Banks were open from 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, and they were a place to deposit money. The lending departments of banks weren't that large then. And so it's changed. When did I see the light? I saw the light when I got myself so hopelessly buried in debt that we had a crisis at a very young age. And I recognized, as the book indicates, that I had to do something about it. And the book will tell the readers that there are 3 things that are a necessity. You have to realize that you're in debt, and some people do not realize how tremendously in debt they are. They know they don't have anything left at the end of the paycheck, but they can't somehow or other relate that to the fact that they may be living light years into the future. So that's the first step, recognizing
On the
that you've got a problem.
expectation that they're going to make more and more money every year.
Oh, sure. Hasn't tomorrow always been better than yesterday in our country? So that's the case. Driven by a generation who absolutely and positively wants it all now. I mean, right away, regardless of whether they can pay for it. And the relationship between having something and paying for it, being able to pay for it, has been completely lost. So the second step, as the book points out, is to stop adding to your debt. And then the third step is very, very painful, as all things in life are, where there has to be a life change, where there has to be a mind change. You got to stop doing what you were doing, and you have to live a different way of life. That may mean that you might have to get rid of some things, move from a large home to a smaller home. Instead of having 2 cars, get along with 1 car.
It's kind of like dieting, you know. We're just beginning to learn that
That's right.
that dieting, there's no quick fix.
There is no quick fix.
That if you want to successfully diet, you have to change permanently the way you eat. And I expect that what you're saying is the same is true financially. If you're in trouble, you're going to have to change permanently
Yes,
the way.
it's a lifestyle, and it's very hard to do in our. Once again, I don't want the listener to think for a minute that I'm a prophet that is standing up high preaching, because I am a part of this generation, and as the book says, to some extent, I still spend money fairly freely. We live a very good life, but the difference between now and then is that I pay as I go, and when I run out of money, I stop.
Well, you've had basically 2 simple, in quotes, rules for financial responsibility. If you're in trouble, you either have to spend less or earn more.
Earn more, or a combination of both.
And in this time of almost recessionary economics, earning more seems to be the less likely of the scenarios. And if families do elect to earn more, for instance, by having an extra job or by having a spouse go to work who wasn't working before, that actually impacts in terms of stress on the family, in terms of less time to spend with the family, and even more expenses maybe in terms of childcare. So right now, as we speak in '94, when you're looking at earning more, it's probably the less likely scenario, would you think?
Yes, I agree with you. I think that the family is already, the psychologists will tell you that the family life, the quality of family life for the most part in this country has deteriorated substantially. And I'm not talking about the materialistic quality, I'm talking about the quality, the emotional quality of the family. And then, of course, what happens is when you are striving to earn that dollar, you tend to placate your children or justify your absence by doing things that you shouldn't do. You tend to kind of want to buy that, and so the children have more things because the parents are guilty because they can spend less time with them, and that's not that's not really good, because you're teaching a whole new generation of consumers that it's perfectly okay to work all the time and have all these things and not spend much time as a family.
In fact, as we're speaking close to the holidays of 1994, I'm thinking about watching children often opening Christmas presents and being quite overwhelmed by the number, and it seemed to me as if it's just a way of modeling for children the glories and attractions of unlimited consumerism.
Yes, that's right. In our own family, we have always had nice Christmases, but I do agree with you, it does seem like Christmas is getting more grandiose and larger by the scale. The toys, the price of the toys, if they can hardly be called toys these days, are absolutely astronomical. And some of the things that children expect cost an awful lot of money, and there are a lot of them.
And when retail stores expect to get what? Some of them up to 70% of their annual profit from holiday buying. It seems as if we've lost touch with.
We do a lot of consulting in the retail industry. We've reorganized a number of major retail operations, chains, several hundred stores in a couple of instances, and we know that retail, 3/4 of the retail dollar comes in the short period of time between the beginning of November and the end of December, and it's a life or death situation for retailers. Interestingly enough, where retailers used to really earn their dollars by selling their product, now everything's on sale. The consumer is absolutely sale crazy. If it isn't on sale, they aren't going to buy it. And the margins that the retailers are operating on are so thin that all of those letters that you, I'm sure, received, like I received and all of your listeners received in September, October, and early November of 1994, offering credit cards, sent a strong message home, and that is that retailers are really earning more profits on their credit card charges than they are on the actual products that they're selling, because their margins are so thin. So credit has become not only a way of life for the consumers, it's to some extent become a necessity for the retailer.
Well, I was just reflecting as I was reading your book and preparing for this conversation that my parents did not ever have credit cards, nor do they now. In my generation, I have a credit card, but I use it only for travel or for fairly major expenses that I want to float a 30-day loan on. But my children have credit cards and do use the credit feature. How is it that credit cards have changed so much in just 3 generations, or our attitude maybe toward credit cards?
Well, it's once again, we are once again a product of our society. Our society is driven by materialism. Our society is driven by having it now, and having it now means that you have to tap into the future, and there's no greater way to tap into your future than to charge something that you can have now and have to pay for it over a period of time. The unfortunate set of circumstances with credit cards is that you now can charge money on credit cards. You can actually get cash advances. That is a very scary set of circumstances. When a person has to charge money on their credit card, they have become what I refer to as a credit junkie. They've gone beyond the even unreasonable use of credit, and they are in the pathetic use of credit, and they have some real serious problems. Now, that has happened within the last 30 years and has become very, very prevalent in the late 80s and the early 90s. And I'm afraid it's going to continue. Credit card charges are soaring. Visa alone in the last quarter of 1994 increased $74 billion over the previous quarter, a comparable quarter of 93. So people are using their credit cards more and they're charging more, they're going out further. And with the 1994 holiday season coming into play, people are charging more than they did in 93. And I suspect that is, once again, they say people are spending because it's pent up. They want to spend, they want to have these things. And the hens are going to come home to roost in January and February of 95 as they come in every first quarter of every year after somebody has gone on a binge.
But aren't the credit cards companies partly at fault too? They're allowing people with serious credit risks to continue to charge on their credit cards. As we talked about before we went on the air here, I noticed that my credit card, my credit line goes up almost every time I use the credit card. There seems to be a not so subtle encouragement on the part of credit companies to say, use us more, use us more. We don't care, as long as you pay a few dollars, we'll continue to offer you credit.
I suspect that because we deal in this area so much, that if you understand the way industrial and commercial credit is administered, there is an allowance for bad debt, for write-offs, for people who aren't going to pay, that is proportionate to the volume of the credit cards. So that if a credit card company does $25 billion in credit sales, there is an incremental amount that is allowed for losses. And so the higher the volume, the greater losses they anticipate taking. And the higher the volume means that they have to reach out and do one of two things. They either have to extend more credit to people who it's justified, or they have to extend a little bit of credit to people who are not creditworthy in hope that they will pay. Those are the only two ways that credit card companies can increase volume. And so that's why every time you use your credit card, your credit limit is raised.
A little mathematical game here. Let's go back to when you started. How did you start to become a counselor of credit and indebtedness to people? You said you started out in the banking business.
Well, no, I started out on the streets of a major Midwestern city as a bill collector. And as a bill collector and then as a repossessor, I saw the results of debt.
You were a repo man.
I was a repo man. I saw people losing things, and I saw the hurt and the pain. And then I got into banking, and I saw more and more of it. And then I was exposed to serious problems as a result of debt, divorces, family arguments, bankruptcies, and bill collectors such as myself pounding on your door at all hours of the day, and telephone calls in the evening, and so on and so forth like that. So I saw it, and because I was, even though I had never gone bankrupt or never had anything repossessed, and I've always paid my bills, believe me, I lived on the edge, and so I knew what it felt like, and I could only imagine the pain and the suffering, and began to, as my book indicates, really be a counselor to people who would come to me to borrow money. I wanted to make sure they understood what they were doing, and there's a section in the book of one couple that I kind of take the reader through that was perpetually in debt for 15 or 20 years that I knew them, and went from one problem to the other. And then it was natural to go into the business area after that, which I did. And then for the last 20 years, I have been a federal bankruptcy receiver and a federal bankruptcy trustee. So I see what happens in the bankruptcy courts, and I see how people lives are absolutely devastated. Debt is a horrible sickness. It is a disease. It is akin to alcoholism, and debt, rightly used, is a wonderful thing. We're all in debt. I owe money. You owe money. I can't imagine a listener that doesn't owe money. I think we talked about this before the program. Most of us have mortgages on homes, and if we didn't, we wouldn't be able to have the homes that we have. Mm-hmm. So some degree of debt is perfectly okay. But I got into it by seeing the ravage that debt did to individuals, and because I was pretty good at advising other people, because I had been where most of them had been once upon a time, and I knew how to solve the problem. I knew how to get out of it.
Well, you come from a very rich background, really, that has led you along all those steps along the way to where you advise corporate and even
Yes.
government and pension plans
Yes,
today.
we do.
Were you surprised to see how much impact indebtedness had upon families in terms of marriage and divorce?
I really wasn't until I became very closely acquainted and became a very good friend of a very famous author, M. Scott Peck, who wrote the book The Road Less Traveled,
and who wrote the
foreword to my
Mm-hmm.
book. And when I was talking with Scotty, and he knew the business that I was in, because I still do an enormous amount of lecturing. I put on seminars to banks, I lecture to lenders, I lecture to CPAs and to attorneys and things like that. So he knew of me, and it was in conversations with him that the direct relationship between debt and the actual problems that it really caused. He indicates in his foreword that he had people come to them, they couldn't even balance their checkbook. I mean, most of the marriage problems, and psychologists will tell you that, most of the real problems in marriage began with partners bringing obligations into the marriage, and the marriage getting itself into, I mean, most arguments are over money. I mean, they truly are. Sure, some marriages have problems with sex and with children and things like that, and miscommunication and not being able to communicate. What greater evidence of miscommunication than the couple not being able to communicate on debt? Mm-hmm. I mean, people who are getting married, you know, they're deeply in love, and they're planning where they're going to go on their honeymoon, and they're planning what they're going to name their first child. And the gal doesn't have any idea how much in debt the guy is, and vice versa. And they get into the marriage, and all of a sudden, all these pieces of paper come in the mail, and it's a tragedy that this is not a prerequisite, like a blood test. I mean, both people ought to fill out a financial statement before a marriage, just like a blood test, or they can't get a marriage license. So one knows what they're getting into.
What about marriages in which there's a saver and the other spouse is a spender?
Opposites attract, and sometimes those are good marriages. There's a constant pulling, there's a constant tugging, and I suppose it depends on who the stronger is. If the saver is the strongest, then the marriage can be salvaged. If the spender is the strongest, then sooner or later the saver is going to get very, very discouraged, because they're going to find out they're not getting anywhere.
So money can, in marriage, can be sort of a control factor too.
Very much so.
What's a good way to teach financial responsibility? I assume you do some teaching of financial responsibility in your work, particularly with individuals. What about kids?
Well, that's the best way. I was going to say that's the best way to teach financial responsibility. It's awful hard to teach an old dog new tricks. But
especially when the old dog is in trouble.
That's right. The easiest way to teach financial responsibility is to the child. Giving a child an allowance without any direct relationship to work is like teaching the child that money has no value. So there should be work attached to allowances, which is the first form of money that most children get. And the work should be done good. It should be done good. And the parents should force the child to save some portion of the allowance. I don't care if the allowance is $5 a week. $1 of it should be set aside into savings. That's responsible teaching. But the problem is the people who are raising the families nowadays haven't had that taught to them, or if it was taught to them, they've forgotten it. And they're not passing it on, and they're creating a whole new generation of people who are going to spend, of people who are going to be elected, of people who are going to go to Washington, of people who are going to overdraw their checking accounts, and of people who are going to push our country further and further into debt.
In fact, in the early 90s, when we were in a very recessive area, people were told that recovery depended upon consumer spending.
That's right.
Which sort of reinforced that whole idea, in my mind at least, that America has become such a consumer society.
It has, because you see, the alternative to what you've just said is pain.
And none of us
everybody
want
wants to avoid pain. We want to avoid. It's an interesting title to Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. Everybody wants to take the road most traveled, which is the easiest way, which ultimately becomes the hardest way. Avoid pain at all costs. Don't do anything that's unpleasant. Don't do without anything that you can have, even if you have to charge it and load yourself to the point where you can't sleep at night. That's perfectly okay. Avoid pain at all costs. And so our government, in essence, was saying that, avoid pain at all costs, and we'll be able to continue to make life easy for you by providing all of these quote unquote entitlements. Even though we can't pay for them, we're going to give them to you.
That same government in December 7th, 1994, Orange County declared bankruptcy. You wrote this book in 1992.
That's right.
What were your thoughts when on December 7th when you heard that on the news?
The skeptics that suggested to me after reading my last chapter that I was an alarmist, in my opinion, I vindicated myself. because I'm convinced that because of the gap that is widening at such an alarming rate between those that have and those that have not, and the continued increase of our national debt, is someday going to make government bonds. Someday, the government is going to be sending letters to holders of bonds, and they're going to be defaulting on interest. 59 cents out of every dollar that you and I pay in taxes goes to interest on our national debt. When the time comes when that is $1.01, we know that the interest can't be paid. It may be a very simplistic approach, but quite frankly, it's a realistic approach, as simplistic as it is.
Is the federal government heading towards bankruptcy?
Yes, it is. The federal government, if it was an individual, if it was a corporation, would have long ago been declared bankrupt, and its assets would have been liquidated. The only reason that the government hasn't been declared bankrupt is that it has an ability that no other business or no person has. It has the ability to continue to mortgage itself far into the future. And but our government, as we talk today, is bankrupt. It is illiquid. And people say, oh, well, the government owns billions and billions of dollars of lands and so on and so forth like that. Well, I'm not too sure the government can sell those billions and billions of dollars worth of land in our national parks, and I would not like to think that that's one of the ways of getting them out of trouble. But the government is absolutely illiquid. It's insolvent, and a lot of the services and entitlements that it's providing society have got to be curtailed. Things have got to be privatized. Things have got to be sold.
Will we survive?
I think that we will survive, but there will be a time when this country has to go through pain. It probably won't be in my generation, probably won't be in my lifetime, but I'll bet it will be in my children's lifetime, and it will certainly be in my grandchildren's lifetime. There's going to have to be a lot of pain that is going to have to be suffered. People who are historians can study the French Revolution and know that the French Revolution came about as a result of the French government going bankrupt. That's why it came.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jim, we've run out of time. Do you find it ironic, just one last quick question, that Clinton, who is making some small steps toward reducing the deficit, is so disapproved of by the general public?
Everybody who is sent to Washington is sent to bring home the bacon. What the people who are sending them there don't understand is that the bacon is taken from somebody else who's sent to Washington to bring home the bacon. We're all fighting after the same basin. If we want it now, Clinton and any other president is not able to do it alone.
Thank you, Jim, for
You're
being
welcome.
with us.
Thank you.
Good book.
Bye-bye.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.